Hello, viewers. After some time, we want to start and continue with our series of presentations coming from this channel, Truth for These Times. And after receiving all the evidence from our previous presentations that indeed a church does fall, or a church becomes Babylon, there are those who will get an escape route and say the church of God does not fall. So it is at this moment that we need to ask ourselves, which church does not fall? Because the church which will be triumphant at the last time is seen in the book of Revelation chapter 14 verse 1, which reads, "And I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads." And the description of such is like in verse 4, "These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and unto the Lamb." This is the church that will be triumphant at last on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So many people in our time have had a chance of reading some of the writings of the prophet Ellen G. White, and they find it easy to misquote or misrepresent what she was trying to say back in the 1880s. In fact, in one of her most important letters, popularly known as Letter 55, which can be found in its original in the 12th volume of manuscript releases, page 319, you will find some of the most important things that we need to learn in our time. So the question we need to ask ourselves at this moment, even as we begin, is which church does fall and which church does not fall? Because there are some paragraphs that are left out of Letter 55 as they appear in Selected Messages, Book 2, beginning from page 377 to 380. Some important paragraphs are left out of the letter, which indicate that a church actually does fall. And let's begin by quoting these paragraphs which have been left out. It goes like this: "I think of his great sorrow as he wept over Jerusalem, exclaiming, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets, and stonest them that are sent unto thee. How often will I have gathered thy children together, as a hen doth gather her brood and her wings, and ye will not." This we read in Luke chapter 13 and verse 34. Then she proceeds, "God forbid that these words shall apply to those who have great light and blessings. In the rejecting of Jerusalem, it was because great privileges were abused, which brought a denunciation upon all who lightly regarded the great opportunities and the precious light that were entrusted with their keeping. Privileges do not commend us to God, but they commend God to us. No people are saved because they have had great light and special advantages. For these high and heavenly favors increase their responsibility. And in fact, the other paragraph which is left out is this one. The more increased light God has given makes the receiver more responsible. It does not place the receiver in any safer position unless the privileges are wisely improved, prized, and used to advance God's glory. Christ said, "Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." The last paragraph, which is left out of letter 55, as it is reproduced in Selected Messages, Book 2, is this one. When Jerusalem was divorced from God, it was because of her sins. She fell from an exalted height that Tyre and Sidon had never reached. And when an angel falls, he becomes a fiend. The depth of our ruin is measured by the exalted light to which God has raised us in his great goodness and unspeakable mercy. Oh, what privileges are granted to us as a people. And if God spared not his people that he loved, because they refused to walk in the light, how can he spare the people whom he has blessed with the light of heaven, in having opened to them the most exalted truth ever entrusted to mortal man to give the world? She is talking of which people? The Seventh-day Adventists. And these paragraphs that I have just quoted from the original letter 55 are left out strategically because Selected Messages was written selectively way back in 1958, so that the apostasy that had happened at that time, when the Protestants, when the last remnant church had stretched a hand and clasped hands with Rome, this was a very serious time, and the Jesuits, with their tricks and theatrics, left out some important paragraphs of a letter and said the church does not fall. But let us ask ourselves, which church was Ellen White talking about? It is the SDA movement. It is the SDA church under Sunday law. She was not talking of a corporate body. She was talking of believers, the same believers that we see triumphant on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, according to the book of Revelation, chapter 14. Now, you see, when we read in Testimonies, volume 5, page 712, which says, "When God has given us light, showing the dangers before us, how can we stand clear in his sight if we neglect to put forth every effort in our power to bring it before the people?" And exactly that's what we are doing now. Can we be content to leave them to meet this momentous issue unwarned? So I also ask myself a question. Can I be confident that I am doing the work of God when we are not telling God's people the dangers that are awaiting them? Because the church, which would not have fallen way back in 1886 and 1888, is the believers who will stand steadfast even under the persecutions of Sunday law, when the church at that time had formed an image of the beast. It is the Protestant denominations of that time in 1888 which had formed an image of the beast under the National Reform movement, and the persecutions which were to come upon the people of God were persecutions as a result of the success of the career of the National Reform movement. Because now what we read in Selected Messages, Volume 2, page 380 and paragraph 2 reveals to us the true context of the message, for it says, Satan will work his miracles to deceive. He will set up his power as supreme. The church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. Now, when does the church appear to fall, but it does not fall? It's a time when Satan works his miracles to deceive. Then it proceeds, it remains, the church remains, while the sinners in Zion will be sifted out. Who does the sifting? Is it the corporate body which does the sifting? No. Because the chaff from the precious wheat will be separated by God himself. We read in our writings, page 118, that the work of the third angel is to separate the chaff from the wheat. Then it says, this is a terrible ordeal, but nevertheless it must take place. None but those who have been overcoming by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony will be found with the loyal and the true, without spot and stain of sin, without guile in their mouths. We must be divested of our self-righteousness and arrayed in the righteousness of Christ. So what's the problem here? The problem here is that how do people obtain the righteousness of Christ, which enables them to overcome the schemes of the image of the beast? Because in the same Selected Messages, page 380, paragraph 1, we read, we are not ready and waiting for the orders of God. Nations will be stirred to their very center. Were nations stirred to their very center at that time? No. But are nations stirred to the very center in our time? Yes. Are they making a preparation to pass an international Sunday law, beginning with a national Sunday law? Yes. In our time, they are in that very process. Has the image of the beast been formed? And is the church, the corporate church, the remnant church of the last days, has it made associations with the apostasy? And has it made the image of the beast ready to persecute God's people? Yes. Now, we need to ask ourselves this question. Was the Sunday law passed in 1888? No, it wasn't. What happened shortly after 1888? Writing to Dr. Percy T. Magan, the servant of the Lord said, we may have to remain in this world because of insubordination many more years, as did the children of Israel. But for Christ's sake, his people should not add sin to sin by charging God with the consequence of their own course of action. This is what was written in 1901. Shortly after the giving of the message of righteousness by faith, shortly after Alonzo T. Jones went to defend Seventh-day Adventists in the American Congress, successfully, of course, and against the schemes of the National Reform movement, the same schemes which are being carried today in our world by the World Council of Churches. And now, as she writes in Testimonies, Volume 5, page 712, the National Reform movement, exercising the power of the religious legislation, will, when fully developed, manifest the same intolerance and oppression that have prevailed in the past ages. Human councils then assume the prerogatives of the deity, crashing under their despotic power. Liberty of conscience and imprisonment, exile, and death followed those who opposed their dictates. What the National Reform Movement was to do at that time is what the World Council of Churches is going to do in our time. Because as a result of the terrible rebellion of 1888, when the Church of God rejected the message of righteousness by faith, which could have qualified the believers to go to heaven, the Lord, in His great mercy, stopped the progress of events in the United States of America in the 1890s regarding the efforts of the Protestant churches under the National Reform Movement in lobbying Congress to pass the National Sunday Law. These churches had formed an image of the beast. And as a result of our rebellion now, as a people, and our insubordination that Ellen White was talking about, our disobedience, the Lord has allowed us all to wander in the wilderness of sin for many years than is necessary. And it is in the same manner that ancient Israel wandered in the wilderness many, many years. So it is this time that when we are wandering in the wilderness for many, many years, that the papacy is getting resurrected after it received a deadly wound in 1798. Because shortly after the establishment of the General Conference in 1863, Pope Pius IX, or Pio IX, in 1864, issued the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. And thereafter, when he convened the First Vatican Council in 1870, he also proclaimed the dogma of the papal infallibility, that the Pope cannot err. So, when Ellen White was warning way back in 1880s, as recorded in Testimonies, Volume 5, page 716, she writes, while the Protestant world is by her attitude making concessions to Rome, let us arouse to comprehend the situation and view the contest before us in its true bearings. Let the watchmen now lift up their voice and give the message which is actually present truth for this time. Let us show the people where we are in prophetic history and seek to arouse the spirit of true Protestantism. The spirit of true Protestantism comes with an understanding of the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, which will awake the world to a sense of the value of the privileges of religious liberty so long enjoyed. So, in the United States of America, when renowned preacher Billy Graham sent his own agent, Donald Gray Barnhouse, to come and destroy the very church that God had raised to proclaim the messages for these last days, and he succeeded by making Barnhouse enter into agreements with Seventh-day Adventists that they should calm down, they should make concessions regarding the important features of their faith. When they succeeded in doing that, it is at that time that the church was sold to the hand of the Roman power. So the Jesuits, using their tricks, now they want to deceive the members of the church that the church does not fall. Which church does not fall? It is the believers who will overcome the power of the World Council of Churches in our time, which will do the very same work that the national reform movement was to do during that time. Because the national reform movement succeeded in engaging Senator Blair of the United States of America in 1888. Because in that year, 1888, the Senate of the United States, on May 21, 1888, Mr. Blair introduced a bill which was referred to the Committee of Education and Labor, a bill to secure the people the enjoyment of the first day of the week, commonly known as the Lord's Day, as a day of rest, and to promote its observance as a day of religious worship. It is that time that they were making an attempt to pass the National Sunday Law. But because the people of God were not ready, because the characters of the people of God were not purified, the Lord in his mercy left his people to wander in the wilderness. So it is during this time of our sojourn in the wilderness that many voices have come up and saying, law is here. Law is here. All manner of deception has come upon the people of God. But the greatest deception that has come upon the people of God is when books are written selectively, leaving out the most important elements of what they were trying to say, just to indicate that a church does not fall, which they have led to the hands of the Vatican. Today, we see the current Pope visiting the National or the World Council of Churches at Geneva and addressing that world body. It behooves us as a people of God to study and understand these things, because as we approach these dangers, we are likely to fall if we don't follow on to know how we can escape these dangers. Because in the great controversy chapter called the final warning or the loud cry, Ellen White writes, as the storm approaches, which storm? The storm of the enforcement of the long anticipated National Sunday Law. As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message. Which class of people have professed faith in that angel's message? It is the Seventh-day Adventists. A large class who have professed that faith but have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth, who are involved in the same insubordination that Ellen White was talking about, abandon their position. Yes, those who are not following on to know the present truth will abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. By uniting with the world and partaking of its spirit, as is happening in the churches of God's people today, they have come to view matters in nearly the same light. And when the test is brought, which test? The test of the Sunday Law. When the test is brought, they are prepared to choose the easy, popular side. Men of talent and pleasing address, who once rejoice in the truth, employ their powers to deceive and to mislead souls. They become the most bitter enemies of their former brethren. Why do they become bitter enemies of their former brethren? It is because instead of them preparing themselves for the coming storm, the storm that comes under the Sunday Law, they follow the multitude to say, God will spare his people. God will spare his people. Because when the prophet of the Lord was warning his people, he was warning the people not in vain. Because we read in Testimonies, volume 5, page 81, paragraph 1, as follows. The time is not far distant when the test will come to every soul. Yes, the test will come under the Sunday Law. The mark of the beast will be urged upon us when under the Sunday Law. Those who have step by step yielded to worldly demands and conformed to worldly customs will not find it a hard matter to yield to the powers that be. rather than subject themselves to derision, insult, threatened imprisonment, and even death. The contest is between the commandments of God and the commandments of men. And the contest is just coming shortly. In this time, the gold will be separated from the dross in the church. True godliness will be clearly distinguished from the appearance and tinsel of it. Many a star that we have admired, for its brilliance will then go out in the darkness. Many of the people we have loved preaching the gospel, preaching the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, we will no longer see them. Many a star will go out into the darkness because they did not follow on to know the light of truth or to teach the truth for their time. Chaff like a cloud will be borne away on the wind, even from places where we see only floors of rich wheat. All who assume the ornaments of the sanctuary but are not clothed with Christ's righteousness will appear in the shame of their own nakedness. This is the message that God gives to his people at this time, when we are going to close the history of the world, because a crisis is awaiting the people of God. A crisis is awaiting the world, and the most momentous struggle of the ages is just before us. And events that for many years we have thought will not come to pass, they are now taking place before our own eyes as the movement from climate change gains momentum in the world. The question enforcing Sunday observance, even in Pope's letter, Laudato Si, is the question of enforcing the Sunday law upon the world. But the question is, but are we ready? Are we ready for the issue? Have we faithfully discharged the duty which God has committed to us of giving the people a warning of the dangers which are coming before us? No, many of us are failing. Many of us are failing in our God-entrusted duty to warn his people of what is coming upon the world at a time like this. But we are so confident in misquoting the writings of the spirit of prophecy. We are so confident, even those things that we read in the testimonies, we read many of them out of context. One of these is found in Selected Messages, Volume 2, page 390 and paragraph 2, which says, there is no need to doubt, to be fearful that the work will not succeed. Which work will not succeed? God is at the head of the work. When was God at the head of the work? Is it when God's church was sold down the path to the Babylon, to the Vatican? Is it at that time? Do you need to quote Ellen White out of context today when we have gone very far from the way of the Lord? And many cannot even blink when they say, God is at the head of the work. When was God at the head of the work? He will set everything in order. When does he set everything in order? If matters need adjusting at the head of the work, at the head of each work, God will attend to that. We quote Ellen White out of context and deceive God's people that the ship will go into harbor. When the ship will come to a shipwreck, when God's people, the true remnant of God, that we see on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, who are singing the song of Moses and the Lamb, who have triumphed at last over the beast and his image. Yes, this is the true church of God which will not fall. This is the church which has been proclaiming the third angel's message. This is the church that has been proclaiming true worship. This is the church that has been calling God's people to come out of Babylon. It is a time like this. It is a time like this that we need to examine the things of God and put matters in their proper perspective. Because if we fail to do that, we will be swept by the cloud. We will be swept by those who are quoting the writings of Ellen White out of context. Now, I want to invite you all, my viewers, as we proceed to examine these things, to understand that our purpose in making all these presentations is to make God's people obtain the righteousness that will enable them to overcome the beast and his image and the image of the beast. It's a time like this that we should seek to know God's purpose through this important channel, Truth for These Times. Welcome.